He hid half a sandwich in his hoodie, like it was something to be ashamed of, and as the teacher scolded him in front of everyone, the hallway held its breath. Until a calm voice said, "If he didn't get to eat this morning, that's not his fault." That voice belonged to Aaliyah Brooks, once a student here, now the district's youngest interim director. Her story isn't about climbing a ladder. It's about rebuilding the staircase for those who were never allowed to climb. Welcome to Silent Stories, where quiet courage roars. If stories like this mean something to you, subscribe and turn on the bell. These voices matter. Let's make sure they're heard. Laughter can cut deeper than silence, especially when it's sharpened by prejudice. The rain was falling. Not the kind that rushes down in heavy summer sheets, but a cold, whispering February rain, thin, steady, and cynical, like it knew exactly what kind of meeting was about to happen inside the Hillside Unified School boardroom. The kind of rain that made everything feel just a little heavier, a little more unbearable. The room was thick with that stiff, sour air you only find in public buildings that pretend to listen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wet coats hung limply off the backs of chrome chairs. Some attendees scrolled through their phones. Others crossed their legs and sipped lukewarm coffee, as if this were some polite after-dinner event instead of a gathering meant to shape children's futures. Then came the voice over the speaker. Next on the public comment list, student. Speaker, Miss Aaliyah Brooks. A brief silence. Just enough for a few snickers to rise from the front row. Nobody clapped. Some didn't even look up. A few exchanged glances, the kind that said, "Oh great, this ought to be good." That look you get when people believe you have no business standing where you're standing. From the back row, a chair creaked as a teenage girl slowly stood up. The chair groaned like it didn't want her to leave. She walked forward, slowly, purposefully, her worn Converse sneakers making the slightest sound on the polished wooden floor. She wore an old gray blazer, fraying at the cuffs, borrowed from her mother. Her white shirt was pressed but clearly oversized, sleeves hanging slightly too long over her wrists. In her hands she held a folded sheet of paper, clutched like it was armor. She stepped up to the mic, shoulders squared, took a deep breath. "Good evening," she began, voice soft but steady. "My name is Aaliyah Brooks. I'm a senior at Central High." No response. One board member, Ronald Keene, leaned back in his leather chair, tilted his head, and stared up at the ceiling like he was counting the lights. A woman with platinum blonde hair and fire-red nails casually flipped through a notepad. Someone cleared their throat a little too loudly. Aaliyah swallowed. She knew this wouldn't be easy. But she also knew what she came here to say mattered, maybe more than anyone in this room realized. "I'm here tonight to speak about racial disparities in Hillside's school discipline system." A loud sigh, then a laugh, not a kind one, not a confused one, a sharp laugh. The kind that says, "Here we go again." "I have data," Aaliyah continued, "from the State Department of Education. Black and brown students make up 23% of Hillside's student population, but they account for 68% of all suspensions last year." A woman sitting beside Keene scoffed. "Same old narrative." Aaliyah didn't blink, and of those suspensions, the majority were not for violence or serious infractions, but for things like talking in class, wearing hats, or arriving late. Another board member, Mr. Martin, a retired principal, chuckled softly, folding his hands together. "Maybe those students should learn to follow the rules." Aaliyah looked directly at him. Her voice didn't rise, but it tightened with something deeper. "Yes, but strangely, when white students break the exact same rules, they get warnings, or nothing at all. I'm not blaming teachers. I'm calling out a system that punishes one group more harshly than another." Then Keene sat up, his voice cutting through the room like ice. "Young lady, you might want to focus on your grades instead of playing politics. Seems like you're more interested in being on TV than in class." Laughter erupted, this time real and loud. A few chuckles. A few claps. One parent in the audience called out, "She got you there." Someone laughed so hard they knocked over their water bottle. Aliyah stood there. She didn't flinch. Didn't stammer. But her cheeks flushed, not with shame, but heat. The kind of heat that comes from remembering every time. She'd been called to the office for disruption while her white classmates joked freely. Remembering the day her mother, an English teacher, had been reassigned. After challenging grading disparities. Remembering how she handwrote this speech last night because the community library's printer broke. Remembering the friends who dropped out, who gave up. The ones who stopped showing up because showing up didn't mean being seen. She stepped back from the mic. The crowd assumed she was done. That she'd wilt like they wanted her to. She wasn't. Aliyah reached into her backpack, pulled out a sleek black folder, stamped with the blue seal of the state of California. She walked toward the front, not toward the exit, but toward the board table. The people who had just laughed began shifting in their seats. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "I'd like to address this meeting from a different capacity." "What do you think you're doing?" Keen barked. She didn't answer. She placed the folder on the table, opened it, slid out a letter with an embossed header and a handwritten signature. "My name is Aliyah Brooks," she said, eyes level, tone unwavering. "And as of this evening, I have been appointed interim superintendent of the Hillside Unified School District by decision of the State Education Board." Silence, the kind of silence that presses down like gravity. The kind that clears throats and dries mouths. You could hear the clock ticking. You could hear the rain outside. But inside that boardroom, no one seemed to know how to breathe anymore. The same girl they had mocked, the same girl they'd told to focus on school, now stood before them with legal authority, with documentation, with every right to lead. "I didn't come here tonight to ask for change," she said quietly. "I came here to be the change. And now, if there are no further objections, let's begin the meeting." No one spoke. No one laughed. The same people who had just mocked her now stared down at their hands, at their notebooks, at their regrets. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. Some, for the very first time, felt the weight of their own smirks. People lie, their words lie. But their eyes? Never. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was loud, the kind that rings in your ears when something too real just happened. The kind that doesn't know where to land. It sat heavy in the air, pressing against the paneling on the walls, clinging to the backs of chairs, crawling into the collars of expensive suits. Aliyah Brooks, 17 years old, dressed in a second-hand blazer and standing in rain damp sneakers, had just shattered every assumption in the room without raising her voice once. And yet, it wasn't the silence that she noticed first. It was the eyes. Eyes darting, blinking, narrowing, widening. Not one person looked at her the same way they had 5 minutes ago. And none of them could pretend. Mrs. Harlan, the one with the perfectly styled hair and pearl earrings that always seemed to glint with condescension, had her lips parted in an awkward half-smile, like she wanted to laugh again but her body wouldn't let her. Her eyes, though, were small, calculating. Already trying to reverse engineer the politics of this. Then there was Mr. Keene. Oh, Ronald Keene, the man who'd laughed loudest, whose voice had just recently pierced the air with mockery. He wasn't leaning back now. He wasn't relaxed. His hands were stiff against the table, knuckles white, jaw tight. But his eyes weren't angry, not yet. They were something worse, defensive. As if the world had just shifted under his feet, and he didn't know which way was up anymore. From the gallery, from the rows of folded chairs behind the wooden railing, came a new wave of silence. But this time it wasn't just stunned. It was watching, intently, nervously, curiously. The kind of watching people do when they realize the story they're living in just changed. Protagonists without warning, Aliyah stood there at the front. Not behind the podium now, but beside the board table, at their level. For a moment, she said nothing. She just looked. She took her time, meeting every pair of eyes she could. Some flinched. Some tried to hold steady. But none escaped the quiet indictment in her gaze. "There are 13 items on tonight's agenda," she said finally, voice calm and measured. "But before we proceed, I believe this board owes the community and its students an explanation. And perhaps an apology. You could have dropped a pin in that room and heard it bounce." From the back row, a janitor had paused mid-sweep. He wasn't even trying to hide his grin. He stood there, mop in hand, eyes wide like a kid at a magic show. He knew what he was seeing. History, drenched in fluorescent light and the smell of damp coats. Aliyah continued, her tone shifting slightly, not harsh, not emotional, but anchored in something far deeper, clarity. "I was appointed not because I am extraordinary," she said, "but because the state needed someone who hasn't forgotten what it feels like to be a student in this district. Someone who hasn't lost touch with reality behind layers of procedure and privilege." Mrs. Harland interjected, voice high-pitched and trembling with faux authority. Excuse me, Interim Superintendent Brooks. While we are certainly surprised, I'm sure you can appreciate that this appointment was unexpected for all of us." Aliyah raised an eyebrow. Her voice didn't waver. Surprise isn't an excuse for disrespect. That line hit like a slap, not loud, but sharp. A few people looked down. A few mouths pressed tight. Aliyah kept going. "I came here tonight ready to speak truth. Not to offend, not to grandstand, but to shine a light. And you laughed. Not at my words, but at me. That matters." Someone in the audience murmured. A soft, mm-hmm. Another nodded that, then something even more powerful happened. A woman stood up in the audience, African American, late 40s, wearing scrubs and a name badge clipped to her belt. A nurse, probably just off a shift. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, eyes fixed on Aliyah. Her presence alone was a kind of testimony. Aliyah noticed. Their eyes met. No words were needed. It was enough. "Let's begin," Aliyah said at last. Item 1. A review of the district's disciplinary policy, followed by a proposal to form a student equity oversight committee with actual voting power. Not symbolic, real. Now it was Keene who spoke, voice clipped. "You don't think this is all a bit premature?" Aliyah turned to face him. No smile, just quiet gravity. "No, I think it's late. Years late." She didn't need to raise her voice, because power doesn't always arrive in fury. Sometimes it arrives in stillness, in the voice of a girl no one expected, holding a pen instead of a gavel, speaking truth like it belonged to her, because it did. In the back row, that same janitor, Mr. Reggie, who'd cleaned this building for 22 years and had watched dozens of board members come and go, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smile creeping back. Finally, he whispered to no one in particular. "Somebody came in here and told the truth. There's something about a silent room that brings back the loudest memories." Aliyah Brooks stood alone now. The boardroom was empty. The echoes of whispers, the weight of stares, the biting chill of doubt, they lingered in the air long after the last chair scraped back, long after the last murmur died out. Everyone had left. Everyone except her. She sat at the long table where she had just led her first meeting as interim superintendent of Hillside Unified. Her blazer felt too tight now, her shoulders sore. It wasn't the fabric or the posture. It was something deeper. Like she had been holding her breath for 17 years and only now was allowed to exhale. But she didn't. Instead, she sat still, quiet, letting the moment breathe through her. The folder lay closed in front of her. The letter still inside, the signature still fresh. Her name typed in bold, her title, her authority. Her victory. So why did it feel like grief? The memory came suddenly, uninvited, like they always did. She was 12. Standing outside room 304. Her mother's classroom. Mrs. Nadine Brooks had been teaching English at Hillside for almost 2 decades. She wore long skirts and cardigans that always smelled like lavender. Her classroom smelled like pencils and peppermint, and her students adored her. Aaliyah used to stay after school sometimes, pretending to do homework just to listen to the way her mom made Shakespeare sound like spoken word. But that day, the door was closed. Her mother was inside, and voices were raised. Male voices, white voices, administrative voices. Words like conduct and insubordination floated through. The cracks Aaliyah had hidden around the corner, small enough to go unnoticed. She watched as the door opened and 2 men in suits stepped out, their expressions clean and casual, like they had just erased a line of chalk. Her mother followed, her eyes red but unbroken. She didn't speak until they had gone. Then she looked at Aaliyah, standing there. "Go home, baby," she said softly. "What happened?" Her mother smiled. It was the kind of smile that looked like a fence trying to hold back a flood. Sometimes when you tell the truth, they try to make you disappear. Aaliyah rubbed her temples, snapping back to the present. She opened her laptop. The glow of the glow screen filled her tired eyes. She clicked through the files the state had sent, policy drafts, suspension data, emails, board minutes. All of it. She knew the numbers like scripture by now. They weren't just statistics. They were names, stories. Kids like Jalen, who got expelled for a hoodie. Like Marisol, who stopped speaking in class after a teacher mocked her accent. Like herself, freshman year. The hallway fight. The moment that almost broke her. It had started over something stupid. A girl bumped into her, knocked her phone. Words were exchanged. Another girl got involved. Someone pushed. Aaliyah tried to walk away. But by the time a teacher arrived, she was the only one standing. The others had run. And because she was standing, she was blamed. "This isn't your first time being disruptive," the assistant principal had said, not even glancing at her file. "You kids never learn." She remembered the way he said "you kids." Like it was a category. A stereotype with legs. Not a human being. With reasons, she was suspended for 5 days. Her mother had written letters. Asked for a hearing. No one replied. And just like that, a record was stamped on her future. A scar made of ink. That week, she stayed home. Read everything she could about education law. She printed the state code from the library printer. Highlighted every line. That was the week the fire started. The week she realized that fairness wasn't a given. It was a fight. Now at 17, sitting in the leather seat meant for people with decades more experience, Aaliyah felt every ounce of that weight pressing down. Her eyes drifted to the empty chairs. They had called her dramatic, disrespectful, entitled, but none of them had seen what she had seen. The janitor getting written up for listening to jazz too loud in the break room. The student with the speech impediment being called slow behind closed doors. The food service worker getting scolded for taking home leftover apples. The weight behind her words wasn't just personal. It was generational. She closed the laptop. The room, dim now with only the soft light from the hallway spilling in, felt cavernous. Her chair squeaked as she stood. She walked toward the large window facing the parking lot. Most of the cars were gone. Only a few remained. An old Corolla, probably the janitor's. A rusty pickup truck with a dented fender. And a sleek black Lexus that belonged to Keene. Of course he had stayed late. Probably in his office, pretending none of this had happened. Aaliyah sighed. She rested her forehead against the cool glass. She hadn't cried all night. Not when they laughed at her. Not when she made the announcement. Not when the reporters started calling. But now, with no one watching, the tears came. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be just slow. Quiet drops sliding down her cheeks like old truths finally letting themselves be known. She wiped her face with her sleeve, took a shaky breath, and turned away from the window. There was still work to do. Kind that required more than courage. The kind that required endurance. She picked up the folder again, slipped it into her bag, and walked slowly to the door. As she reached for the light switch, she paused, looked around one last time, and whispered, just to herself, "You're not done, Alia. You're just getting started." The next morning, the sun rose like it owed someone an apology. Alia hadn't. Slept. Her body had laid still, but her mind never stopped running. It replayed the scene at the board meeting over and over like a film she didn't want to watch but couldn't turn off. The laughter, the sneers, the stunned silence. And then her voice, clear and unshaken, announcing a truth that changed the room. She kept asking herself, did that really happen? But every time she looked at the folder on her nightstand with the state seal and her name stamped underneath the words, Interim Superintendent, the answer was right there. Now she sat behind the desk they had told her she wasn't old enough to sit at, a temporary badge clipped to her thrifted blazer, a fresh mug of tea in front of her, a copy of the district bylaws already open. The office felt too big, the chair too stiff. But the work? The work felt like it fit her hands perfectly. The first encounter of the day was with the front office secretary, Mrs. Lambert, a woman in her late 50s with a stacked beehive hairdo and a voice like warm honey, sharp when needed. "Morning, Ms. Brooks," she said with a tight smile, handing Alia a folder. "Or should I say Superintendent?" Alia smiled. "Interim is fine. Alia works too." "Noted," Lambert replied, tapping a long red nail against her clipboard. "And for what it's worth, I saw what you did last night. Took guts." "Thanks, Alia." Sighed. Now good luck wrangling this bunch. They eat new superintendents for breakfast. At 10 a.m., she met the cabinet. It was surreal. A conference table surrounded by directors, coordinators, and assistant supers. Most had business cards older than she was. They were dressed in neutral colors and practiced neutrality, but she could feel the tension. It sat on the table like another cup of coffee. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Alia began. "I know the circumstances were unusual, but I want to be clear about a few things. I am not here to waste your time, and I hope you won't waste mine. I am here because change is overdue. And it won't wait for comfort." She paused. "Let it hang, so let's get to work." The first 10 minutes passed with polite silence. Eyes scanned agendas. Pens clicked. One man adjusted his glasses 5 times. Then came the first crack in the formality. Mr. Denton, Director of Student Services, cleared his throat. "Forgive me, Interim Superintendent or Alia," you said. "Just want to be sure I'm addressing you appropriately." There was a pause. Alia looked at him, straight-faced. Then let her lips curl just enough. "You can call me Alia. Or Interim Superintendent. Either way, I'm still signing off on your budgets." A beat, then laughter. Small at first, then genuine. The tension cracked. Shoulders relaxed. Denton let out a low chuckle. "Fair enough," he said. "You might be younger than my grandkid, but that was a solid line." "Thanks," Alia said. "And tell your grandkid to apply for the Equity Council. I'm looking for straight shooters." That got a bigger laugh. Suddenly, the meeting flowed. Ideas were thrown around, some good, some nonsense. Alia held her ground. She nodded where it made sense. She challenged where it didn't. It was awkward. It was clunky. It was real, and it was working. But not everyone in the building had turned a corner. At 3:15 p.m. She got the email. Subject: Office visit *Alia. I'd like to speak briefly. Coming by your office now. *RK. He didn't even give her time to reply. Ronald Keene arrived exactly 90 seconds later, didn't knock, didn't wait. He walked in like the air belonged to him. Dark suit, crisp tie, the scent of cologne so sharp it burned. Alia stood, slowly. "Mr. Keene." "Miss Brooks," he said, tone flat. "Or Superintendent, depending on who you ask." She gestured to the seat across from her desk. "Please." He didn't sit. "Let's skip the niceties. I'm going to be blunt. What happened last night was theatrical." Alia folded her hands. "And this visit isn't?" That made him blink. "You're playing a game that has long-term consequences." "Agreed. Which is why I'm taking it seriously. You were appointed for optics. You know it." "I know it. You have zero experience running a district." Alia didn't flinch. "And yet here we are. You in my office, me behind the desk." His nostrils flared. "I served this district for 20 years. And students like me have been underserved just as long." He looked like he might respond, but then he didn't. His eyes landed on the photo on her desk. "That's your mother, Nadine Brooks." Alia's voice softened. "Yes," she once cornered me after a board meeting. Sada used the word underperforming like it was a character flaw. "I didn't forget it." Alia smiled faintly. "Neither did I." He exhaled. "You sound just like her. That's the goal." He turned to leave. "Well," he muttered, hand on the door. "Guess the district should have known better than to fire a teacher. With a daughter like that." Then he was gone. The door clicked shut. Alia sat frozen for a second. Then she let out a sound. A laugh. It started small, then grew. It filled the office. A strange, sweet laugh born from exhaustion, vindication, and something like poetic irony. She laughed until her eyes welled up, and she had to press her knuckles against her lips. "Oh, Mama," she whispered, staring at the photo. "I think I just made that man nervous." The morning after the explosive school board meeting, the district headquarters sat under a veil of misty rain. Trees swayed in the cold breeze, and the front gate creaked open just enough to let the first employees in. Inside, the air was heavy, not from the weather, but from something else entirely. A different kind of storm was brewing, and it came from the new person in charge, Alia Brooks. 17 years old. A student. And now, the youngest acting superintendent in state history. She sat alone in her office at 6:42 a.m., both hands wrapped around a cup of hot cocoa, not coffee. Her eyes were fixed on a bare white wall where the frame from her predecessor's portrait had left faint marks. On her desk, a stack of documents from the State Department of Education, formal recognition of her authority, budget approval sheets, and one thick envelope labeled, Recommended Staffing Policy Reforms. She let out a long, heavy breath. The kind that comes from everything still echoing in your chest after a night like that. But today would be different. Today, she wouldn't cry. Today was the beginning of a strange new era, one where a teenage girl could make the entire system uncomfortable. Not out of disrespect, but simply because she was honest in a way they weren't used to. At exactly 8 a.m., Alia stepped into her first leadership meeting with the district school principals. In the long conference room, the staff trickled in with mixed expressions, some curious, some awkward, a few visibly irritated. On the screen behind her, one bold slide. Welcome to change. It may be uncomfortable. Alia stood, hands slightly trembling as she held the slide remote. She gave a small smile. Good morning, I'm Alia Brooks. You can call me acting superintendent, or just Alia. I don't have a nameplate yet, but I do have a microphone and a budget map that's WELL skewed. So let's begin. A. Pause. 2 seconds of stunned silence. Then a few quiet chuckles. She continued. First off, I know some of you think this is a joke. That's okay. I thought the same thing when I read my appointment letter. But the truth isn't funny. Because if this system was working, I wouldn't be here. Some heads lifted. 1 or 2 sighs. A glance or two toward the man seated at the head of the table, Mr. Keene. Hands clasped, face unreadable. Second, I'm not here to lead a revolution overnight, but I will ask questions. I will push back. And sometimes I may say things that don't exactly ... respect the comfort zone of old power. When they got to staffing and teacher pay disparities, Aliyah pulled up a chart. It showed 43 substitute teachers placed in schools in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods, and only 5 in majority white middle-class schools. She didn't accuse. She simply asked, why is this gap so wide? Silence, then like a thunderclap. Miss Brooks, excuse me, acting superintendent, Mr. Keene said, his voice slow and sharp. If you'd reviewed report 34-2B, you'd see it's due to higher sick leave rates in those communities. No one wants to teach there. The fault lies with the community, not the board. Aliyah raised an eyebrow. 3 seconds passed before she replied, thank you, Mr. Keene. I'll be printing that report out, marking it in red ink, and taping it to my office wall, because that ... is exactly why students need a voice in this room, not just people who attend meetings every Wednesday. The room stiffened. A few staff members looked down at their notebooks, quietly smiling behind closed lips. The meeting wrapped at 9:21 a.m. Back in her office, Aliyah checked her inbox. One subject line jumped out. This child is out of her mind. The sender? Marjorie Dellin, principal of a high school, who had just warmly waved to her in the hallway. Aliyah opened it. The first line read, if we let this kind of student emotion run our policy, we might as well elect a cat next. And below that, she talks like she's been oppressed. Sorry, but getting a C+ isn't discrimination. Aliyah didn't cry, didn't rage. She laughed. Out loud. Loud enough that the security guard peeked through her glass door. She typed a reply. Dear Marjorie, thank you for accidentally giving me a clear view into what students are up against behind closed doors. I promise to lead with policies so fair that even if a cat becomes superintendent, no one dares call the teachers arrogant felines. Best, Aliyah. Then she hit send. That afternoon, Aliyah walked through the courtyard of her old school, the one where she'd once been suspended for protesting when a teacher kept mispronouncing black students' names. Torn enrollment posters flapped against the walls. Near the nurse's office, she saw a small boy curled up in an old hoodie, knees to his chest. You okay? She asked gently. The boy looked up. They said I can't stay. I don't have a health form. Aliyah knelt beside him, pulled a laminated badge from her coat pocket. Now you can. You have the right to be here, I promise, he smiled. Shy, hesitant smile. But enough to tell her, change doesn't start on a stage. It starts in the hallway, where someone chooses to sit down and listen. That night, Aliyah got home late. Her mom had made spicy noodles, the usual comfort food for a tired daughter. After dinner, she turned on her laptop. On Twitter, a video of her confronting Mr. Keene had gone viral. Some called her disrespectful, others called her a hero. She opened her digital journal and typed, "They think I'm a joke. I used to think so too. But then I realized no one laughs when the truth's too loud. They don't have to like me, they just have to listen." And she smiled. Not a big smile, but a dry, steady one. Tomorrow would be harder. But she'd be there. Aliyah's tiny apartment had never felt so quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that hangs in the air like a held breath. As if the walls, the shadows, even the silence itself were waiting for something to break. Just hours ago, a 17-year-old girl had stood before an entire school board and brought it to its knees, not with fury, but with truth and courage. And now she sat alone, staring at a cup of instant noodles gone cold. The desk lamp on her wooden shelf flickered like it was just as uncertain. She unplugged it, then plugged it back in, but the light stayed dim, like the whole room was pulling away from reality. On the table, a stack of unopened mail, a half-full bag of cookies her mother used to buy, and a small purple notebook. Aliyah opened the notebook and flipped to a page written in her mom's familiar handwriting. Don't fight the storm, girl. Be the one it remembers. She sat still, fingers tightening around the paper. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the window, soft, unrelenting. It sounded exactly like the night her mother died. The night she was only 11. That night, her mom had been burning with fever. The hospital was too far, the money not enough. In the dark, her mother had pulled her close, whispering the old lullaby. When the sky forgets to rain, and the world don't call your name. Baby, your quiet song. You've been strong. You've been strong. Back then, she hadn't understood. She just remembered the warmth, the tremble, the fear. But now, every word echoed as if her mother was standing right behind her, hand resting gently on her shoulder. Aliyah got up and poured a glass of cold water. Her hand trembled slightly. In the mirror, she didn't see the poor kid from the temporary housing unit. She saw the acting superintendent. But the eyes staring back were still the eyes of a girl who never really got the chance to grieve. She thought back to that morning's meeting, the compliments, the flashing cameras, the politicians, eager to take selfies. One of her old principals had whispered in her ear, I always knew you'd make it. But that wasn't what she needed. What she needed was truth, justice, and the quiet hope that somewhere, her mom was proud. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik, you okay? We're all gathering at the community hall. Wanna come? She stared at the screen, then turned it off. Not because she didn't want to be around people, but because tonight, she needed to be alone. She pulled the curtain back. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Thunder rolled somewhere far off. She sat down at her mother's old keyboard. Her fingers searched for the notes, G, A, B minor, and then her voice, low and shaky but steady, began to sing. When the sky forgets to rain. Her voice was soft, strained, but it didn't break. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because tonight didn't need tears. The weight of the day, of the stares and expectations, had already said enough. Some nights don't need storms. Don't need applause. Just the quiet courage to keep going. She lit a candle and placed it by the window, not for light, but because her mom once said, when everything feels too dark, light something, not to see better, but to remind yourself you're still here. Aliyah picked up her pen and wrote on the final page of the purple notebook, I'm not crying tonight, Mama, but I miss you. She closed the book, leaned back in her chair, and watched the candle flicker like it was breathing. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside her, something new had begun to glow, a kind of peace that doesn't come from the world quieting down, but from finally hearing your own heart speak. The old high school hadn't changed. The peeling paint still flaked from the walls, the same graffiti curved like old scars down the corridors, and the speaker above the courtyard still wheezed the national anthem in a crackling, metallic breath. But Aliyah had changed. She was no longer the 17-year-old girl called to the principal's office for asking why her friend didn't qualify for a scholarship. She wasn't here to reclaim justice for herself. She had come back for the children who were still here, those who couldn't yet leave. It was a heavy noon, thick with summer heat. Students swarmed the yard, laughter and tired complaints rising in the steam. Aliyah walked slowly through the hallway. Her heels tapped over the faded linoleum, echoing down the hall until she heard a teacher's voice rising over the din. Didn't I tell you no eating in class? The teacher barked. Aliyah stopped. A small boy stood hunched against the wall, hoodie pulled tight, eyes downcast. Half a sandwich was just tucked inside his sleeve. His curly hair clung damply to his forehead. There. Eyes met. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Alia knew that look, knew the texture of that kind of hunger. And worse, the smell of shame that often clung to it. She turned calmly to the teacher, her voice gentle but firm. If he's eating in class, maybe it's because he hasn't had breakfast. That's not his failure, it's ours. Silence spread. Like ink, the teacher froze. The boy's stomach groaned audibly in the quiet. A few kids snickered. A few looked away. But Alia just smiled. We can change the rules, she said. Or at least understand why they were made. Later that day, she met behind closed doors with the school's food service board. Her blazer was off, sleeves rolled. The whiteboard. Behind her read in big, thick letters, "Food equals dignity." She faced a room of skeptical adults. If a student has to eat in secret like they're stealing, that's not their failure. It's a failure of this system. We have a budget. We have choices. The question is, what do we choose to prioritize? A balding man in the corner crossed his arms. If we make breakfast free and open, kids will abuse it. Take extra, waste it. Alia didn't argue. She just told a story, a winter day, the heater broken. Her and her mom splitting their last packet of instant noodles. Her mom saying, "I'm not hungry, you eat." But later that night, in the dark, Alia heard her mother's stomach growl. "No one abuses hunger," she said quietly. "They survive it." The proposal came next, unconditional breakfast. Free, no ID checks, no behavior score thresholds, no surveillance cameras. Just food. For anyone who needs it. At first, the board dismissed it. Too idealistic, too vulnerable to abuse. But Alia didn't argue back. She went to the students. Within a week, the campaign began. TikToks, short reels, and a wave of voices rising from the cafeteria tables and hallways. Eating isn't a privilege. Hashtag let them eat. The phrase caught fire. And then one evening, just as she was about to shut her laptop, an email came through. No subject line. Just a message. "I used to be that kid with the sandwich in my hoodie. I'll fund breakfast for the whole year." Alia stared at the screen. Her eyes didn't water, but her heart did something deeper. She laughed, not because she'd won, but because she remembered the broken heater, the cold bowl of rice, and her mother's warm lie, "I'm full, baby." Alia looked out the window. The sky was violet. Her reflection faint on the glass, and in her eyes there was fire. And hunger, not just in the stomach, but in the soul, was finally met with something more powerful than food. Justice. And it was warm enough to eat. Scene opens in a sterile city council chamber. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Chairs are lined up in rows. Alia, now one of the youngest members ever to sit on the council, sits still before a thick packet labeled 2025 City Budget Reallocation Proposal. Her fingers skim through the figures. Millions allocated for police, downtown security, surveillance systems. But the line for youth community services is a tiny afterthought, buried beneath bureaucracy. Her throat tightens. It's the same tightening she felt at 17, sitting in the principal's office, listening to excuses about why students who looked like her didn't meet the moral criteria for scholarships. Alia takes a deep breath. She raises her hand. All heads turn. "I'd like to propose an amendment to budget items 4.2 and 7.8. I want to transfer $2 million from the surveillance allocation to school-based mentoring programs." A hush falls over the room. One older council member raises an eyebrow. "Do you even understand what you're touching here? Security is top priority." Alia's voice is soft but firm. "If a child grows up afraid, that's not security. That's a prison with a dress code." Debate erupts. Some smirk. Others nod. Alia doesn't shout. She tells stories. About kids labeled as at risk for wearing hoodies. About her friend Malik, sent to psychological counseling for drawing. A crying eye in art class. Someone asks, What if violence increases after the reallocation? Aaliyah replies, then let's redefine violence, not just as fights in hallways, but as the silence of kids who stop speaking because they know it won't matter. The final vote comes, 4 in favor, 4 against. The tiebreaker rests with the council chair, a man known for staying neutral. He looks at Aaliyah, then at the document, and says, when I was in middle school, someone stole my lunch, not out of hunger, but because they knew I wouldn't fight back. I wish someone like you had been around back then. He signs, approved. Last scene. Aaliyah stands outside her old high school, where a new sign now hangs, Counseling and Wellness Room. Funded by the Youth Justice Initiative. A boy walks up, reads the sign, then looks at her. Did you make this happen? Aaliyah smiles. I just signed the paper. The rest? That's up to you all. Aaliyah found it tucked in an old shoebox buried deep in her mother's basement. The box itself was faded, edges fraying. Inside, a broken doll's head, a crayon-worn Bible, and one folded piece of yellowed notebook paper. The handwriting was clumsy, crooked the kind only a 5th grader could pull off. But every letter seemed to tremble with hope. Dear City Council, my name is Aaliyah Walker. I am 10 years old. My mom works at night. I wait for the bus every morning in the dark. We used to have a bus stop near our building, but now it's gone. Sometimes I cry because my shoes get wet from walking. But I still want to go to school. Please, can you bring the bus back? I promise to be really good in class if you do. Sincerely, Aaliyah, you. She stared at the letter, fingers shaking, not from cold, but from memory. Not of the walk, but of the little girl who believed no one would ever care. Aaliyah smiled, a bittersweet thing. All these years she had fought, spoken, stood in front of crowds, panels, podiums. And still, she had never mailed that letter, because back then, she didn't believe anyone would read it. And maybe that's why today, she became the kind of woman people couldn't ignore. She framed the letter in glass and hung it on the wall of her office at the Community Education Advocacy Center. Right above the guest chairs were parents, and children sat with too many questions and too few answers. Beneath the frame, a handwritten note. The letter no one read, so I became the voice no one could ignore. That afternoon, a little girl waiting for her mom to fill out tuition aid forms glanced up at the frame. She squinted, then asked, Miss Aaliyah, is that a real letter? Aaliyah nodded. It's mine. I wrote it when I was your age. Did they ever write back? Aaliyah paused. Double quotes, no. But because they didn't, I learned how to speak louder. The girl giggled, then stared again at the letter as if trying to memorize it. Maybe one day she'd write a letter of her own, and this time someone would read it. She never sent that letter, but she became the answer to it. Aaliyah's voice started as a whisper, buried in the back of a shoebox. And now it sits framed on a wall, not as a plea, but as a promise. To every kid who's still waiting in the rain. Keep going. To every voice still shaking at the microphone. Keep speaking. And to you watching this right now, thank you for listening. If this story moved you, let it move someone else. Share it, like it, and subscribe to Silent Stories, where every quiet fight deserves to be heard.